So a few days ago, we posted a question of the day on the Stopping Socialism Facebook page. The question read, "The federal government continues to spend trillions more than it has. Will the dollar survive the next decade?" So this is a topic that Justin and I talk about somewhat frequently. When we're not recording videos and anything, it's just in our spare time. It's just the interesting
Wow.
lives that we.
It's really
so
depressing.
so we figured we'd record a video where we weighed in with our thoughts and comment on some of your thoughts. But before we jump into that, I have to say the same thing, the same spiel that I give in every one of these videos, that you could help us get the message of stopping socialism out to more people just by hitting the like button, sharing this video, subscribing to this, leaving a comment. It's very easy, doesn't cost you a nickel. Things to do to help us get this message to more people, break through those big tech algorithms that hold back messages just like this. So the question is, will the dollar survive the next decade? Justin, we got a lot of comments on this. It looks like the consensus in the comments of the post on the Facebook page is a resounding no. So, Justin, was this the answer you were expecting to get?
Well, on a stopping socialism, post, maybe. I think our audience is pretty skeptical of the government and pretty concerned about the national debt. So I don't know that it's super. I guess it's a little surprising. You would think some people, because we talk to a lot of I talk to a lot of conservative people. I'm sure you do too, who think, yeah, it'll be fine. Like, it'll work itself out.
Sure. Right.
They're more concerned about other sort of hot topic issues. They're not as concerned about this.
Right.
So it is a little surprising how many people were full on, nope, dollar isn't going to last. Because that's a pretty big statement. I mean, that's not like saying, do you think Joe Biden's going to run in 4 years? That's not like just a regular prediction. That's like a major change to the economy.
It's a very good point. Yeah, and as someone, who has written op-eds with titles such as "Thanks to the Biden administration, America could be on the verge of an economic disaster," and "The evidence is clear, Biden, congressional Democrats are pushing America towards economic disaster," I assume you agree.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, I think that there's no doubt that we are headed toward a world where the dollar, as we understand it today, doesn't exist. Now, will it survive the next decade? That's the part of the question that's a little tricky. I
It's
think
just like an over-under. You're not sure if it's 9 years or 11.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could see it taking 15, or 20. But
Entirely possible.
I do think the dollar is going to collapse, and that it's not going to be the currency. In fact, I think they're going to phase it out before it ever collapses to a digital dollar. And they'll call it a dollar. And so most people won't even realize that the currency has changed because they'll just name it the dollar. And most people don't even pay attention enough to know that that's what's going to happen. But I think they're going to swap out the paper currency and move to an all digital dollar. And there's just too many reasons why they would want to do this. Number one, the currency that we have now is collapsing. It doesn't make much sense. We owe massive amounts of debt, and it would be much easier to switch to a different currency. Number two, having a digital currency allows you to track spending more easily, and by spending I mean regular people spending money. They could more easily tell what people are spending money on. They could control spending a lot more easily. They could stop people from buying products that are unsavory or that they don't like. So instead of having a cigarette ban, you just say, well, theoretically you could buy cigarettes, but you can't buy them with our dollars. And you could actually do that. Right now it's impossible because people could just pay in cash. But you could do that under a system like this. You could have all sorts of different ways of controlling behavior or encouraging behavior. Think about stimulus money. Think about providing people with stimulus. You don't need some kind of crazy thing to provide people with stimulus. All you do is just push a button, everybody gets $1,000, or the people you want get $1,000, and it's all just created. Whenever the government wants. I mean, it just makes so much sense for that to happen. It's hard to imagine the dollar surviving. Frankly, I don't know why it would.
Sure. I mean, we've talked about a number of these topics on various videos and in the Tank podcast, but inflation continues to increase. It's steadily increased every month of the Biden presidency so far. Now, this has been written off as a transitory period while we're coming out of the pandemic by many of the establishment economists. Although there isn't really much evidence to suggest that it's just some short-term thing. We have covered in previous videos the plans for a digital dollar, as you've mentioned, the concept of modern monetary theory and all the terrible implications of that, and the potential end of the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. And like the observed inflation, again, these are just kind of ignored by the establishment, economists and all of that. And then even recently, Joe Biden dismissed the threat of inflation completely during a recent CNN town hall. And I've got our esteemed president queued up right here. So let's hear him talk about it. Hopefully this works.
It is. I sincerely mean this. Prices are up now, and they're up. For example, you're in a position where you're trying to build a house, try to find 2x4s and lumber. Well, guess what? People stop working cutting lumber. They stopped doing it because the unemployment was so down. Now all of a sudden there's this need because people are coming back and
it's because the unemployment was so down.
That makes sense. People were unemployed because the unemployment was down. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's it.
Instead of paying 10 cents, you're paying 20. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. It relates to what in fact is now needed because we're growing. I don't know anybody, including Larry Summers, who's a friend of mine, who's worried about inflation, is suggesting that there's any long-term march here if we do the things we're going to do. For example,
so nobody's concerned, man. Even Larry Summers, according to Joe Biden, doesn't have any concerns about long-term inflation, despite the fact that Larry Summers recently wrote a Washington Post article, or it was some big publication, New York Times,
I don't know,
maybe,
something like that,
talking about how we are marching towards the road of massive inflation. So again, all of these establishment economists, these politicians, the Joe Bidens of the world, are just completely dismissing this threat of major inflation, which, in my opinion, is evidence that we are getting more and more towards a scenario where the dollar is in deep jeopardy. When you're completely ignoring reality, that doesn't bode well for the situation at hand.
No, and the other thing is, if inflation is happening under the current system, the only way to control inflation is to what? You got to raise interest rates. You got to do all this stuff to try to manipulate the economy, to do it. It's kind of a backwards way of doing things, right?
Oh, sure.
Wouldn't it be so much easier if we could just push a button and destroy a bunch of currency and then problem solved, right? Or only let people spend money in certain industries and not in others, or restrict spending in certain ways, have a gigantic control panel for society where you can pull this lever over here and twist this little knob over here, and we can just control prices so that inflation doesn't get out of control.
Justin, are you describing modern monetary theory?
I am. This is what Stephanie Kelton wants, and that would all be so much easier with a digital currency.
Right.
Because you could do all of that. You could just say, okay, can't spend digital dollars on XYZ thing. Okay, we're going to set prices on this over here. We're going to make sure that you're spending money. They could one of the things that I've heard people propose is, let's just put a penalty on people's bank accounts, so that if you're not spending money when we need people to spend money, if we want to stimulate the economy, we just say, okay, 10% penalty on everything that you keep in your bank account at the end of the year beyond X amount. Right, beyond X amount of money. So if you have more than $10,000, that's going to be taxed. We're going to take 10% of whatever that is every month. You better spend it. And so people are forced to spend the money. I mean,
and if you think that's a crazy idea, if you're listening to Justin and saying that's crazy, just look up Cyprus of 2010. They did that. So it's not insane.
There are top economists highly, incredibly powerful people calling for all of this stuff.
Right.
This isn't conspiracy. This is what they are all discussing, doing this. They want to do this. Read Stephanie Kelton. Read the kinds of things that she says. Stephanie Kelton, the queen of modern monetary theory, who was one of the top economists for Bernie Sanders and his presidential runs, one of the top economists for the Senate Democrats previously, helped rewrite the Democratic Party's platform in 2020, invited onto the panel by Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. This is the stuff that she's openly calling for. She's written whole books about this kind of thing. This is all there. I mean, it all makes so much sense to switch to a digital currency.
Well, okay, so you mentioned the idea of like a conspiracy theory. So there were several commenters in this question of the day post that we put on our Facebook page that suggested that the destruction of the dollar is all part of this plan of the globalists to gain more control over, the world and America by extension. Now, of course, outlandish claims are not uncommon in comment sections of Facebook posts or YouTube videos, but I am not so quick to dismiss this idea, considering some of the statements made by people like George Soros. And you were telling me back in one of these conversations that we've had, months ago, that you were reading one of George Soros's books, which you said was very boring. But in it, you talked about his frustration by Americans stubbornly holding on to their national independence, right? Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
Right. He's essentially George Soros. The actual ideology of George Soros is sort of best summarized by globalism. The guy wants lots and lots of globalism.
Right.
And he wants big international institutions kind of running the show, and that's what George Soros wants predominantly. And he has made it very clear that in his mind, the reason why we don't have the kind of globalism that we should have is because the United States is always getting in the way. It's always stopping these big international institutions from doing the things they need to do, whether it's about currency or it's about solving climate change crisis or it's about whatever, you name it. It's the United States that's always the problem. And if the United States could just go along with all the international institutions and just do what everybody else is doing, then the world would be a much better place. And George Soros was writing this not during the Donald Trump era either. I mean, we're talking about, like, he was complaining about this way back, like 20 years ago. He's complaining about this kind of stuff. So although Donald Trump is sort of the, personification of that concern, the guy is all about America first and everything else, whether you love him or hate him, you can't deny that. So I think that without a doubt, there's a part of that. This, if you want globalism, you have to have that. But I also think that it's just even if you were an America first progressive or an America first socialist or something, you would probably want this anyway. Even if you just thought, I don't really care about globalism, I just want America to be best off, you would still have an incentive to want a digital dollar. I mean, that makes sense from any perspective. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be a globalist type thing. What globalists want is they don't want a digital dollar. They want a international currency. They want a new currency that's digital. So they don't even want the dollar. They want the dollar gone. They want to get rid of a U.S. currency, really, and they want some kind of international thing. So I don't even know that that's even a fair thing to say about them. But the fact of the matter is, the people who are running the show, I think, know for sure that the existing dollar that we have today, the existing system, will not be in place in 20 years, 30 years, whatever. It's going to be gone.
Yeah, and before everyone starts spending all the money that they're in their savings accounts, my final statement with all of this is that I have a few reasons to be hesitant to put a timeline on the demise of the dollar. Obviously, I am very concerned about all the things that we had just talked about. I don't brush them off lightly at all. But number one, many of the major currencies around the world are also being equally debased, right? So if this was happening in a vacuum and it was just the United States dollar that was doing all of this stuff, I would feel much more concerned about all of this. But it being relative to the other currencies, it's not quite as bad. Number two, I would have thought and did think that the dollar was reaching the end of its life, in the aftermath of the government and the Fed's response to the 2008 crisis, right? I mean, that's when we got all of the rounds of the quantitative easing. That's when we first really pursued just dramatic money printing in response to an economic crisis. So I would have predicted back in 2008 that within 10 years we would see the end of the dollar. So it looks like the monetary system and structure is very complex and maybe a little bit more resilient than you would think. So those are just the things that, just to kind of keep you on
it's very resilient.
Yeah, to keep you on the windowsill and not take the jump off of that by any means.
No, and the thing
it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take all this stuff very seriously, because we do, for sure.
Right. I think that there are forces at work that oppose this, that are trying to stop it. Right. So
that was my point number 3. We're on the case.
Right.
What do you think we're gonna? You think we're gonna lose? Come on.
Yeah. Well, that's true. We always win. But I do think that it is. There are a lot of factors at work. I think that if a lot of people on the left, especially the elites on the left, if they had it their way, the dollar would have been replaced with some kind of digital thing a long time ago. I think a lot of them feel that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, obviously it hasn't happened yet, but the fact of the matter is they are spending us into oblivion. And at some point, the world, whatever we want here in the United States, at some point the world is going to say, why do we need to depend on the dollar for all of our international transactions, for all of the things that we do? The dollar is the currency of the world. Right. That's the currency the world uses to conduct international business and banking and all sorts of other things. That's the primary currency. Why would they continue doing it when we are so recklessly spending the money?
Yeah.
At some point, they're all going to get together and say, we have more money than you have, United States, together. And we're just going to make our own money. And you're going to come on board, or you're going to be left behind. And the elites here are going to say, we're on board. Sign us up.
And there's plans for this, and we've talked about it. The idea of the
open.
SDRs and the digital SDR, the idea of the IMF coin. These are all like international
and we're
currencies.
talking about people calling for this who are the heads of central banks. And people who are, we're not talking about some fringe person or some politician somewhere. We're talking about bankers, central bankers, people who are deeply involved in all of this, openly saying, yep, let's do it. Having conferences where they're giving speeches and presentations about how they can do it.
Mark Carney talking about how we need to end the U.S. dollar's dominance in the international.
Yes. And that guy is a top person at central banks and big banks in Canada and in the United Kingdom.
Yep.
And he's openly calling for this. In fact, in the speech that you're referencing in particular, that was in the United States. They had a big conference of people in the United States. He came here and gave a speech about killing the dollar and switching to an international currency. This is going to happen. It's going to happen at some point.
Right.
It just makes too much sense for the people in charge.
Yep. So these questions of the day, Justin post these pretty periodically on the Stopping Socialism Facebook page. So if you want to jump in, obviously you can answer this question that we talked about right here in the comments of this video. But if you want to be ahead of the game, you could check out our Stopping Socialism page on Facebook and put your comments in for the next video, because or the next question, because we intend to make videos about all of the questions of the days that we do. And maybe we'll reference your answer if we think that it is good enough. Justin, any final words on this topic before we sign off for the day?
Nope.
All right, fantastic. Well, if you like this content, you want to see more, you could always subscribe to Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube. If you want to see all of our content, or the vast majority of it, you can go to stoppingsocialism.com. We also share most, if not all, of our content across social medias, across the internet, including Facebook page that I've already mentioned. We also have an Instagram account, a Parler account, pretty much everything if you look hard enough. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Socialist Twitter, GETTR. I still don't even really know what that exactly means. And Parler and anything else. StoppingSocialism.com. Go there. You can always find my work there.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next time.